as a supportive tool for web technology. So before I start, right, to understand about my audience here, how many of you here are web developers? Right, so we have 1/3. And that means the majority of the group here are not web developer. Assuming you're coming from mobile or Flutter or maybe other background. So what I will do is I will start with talking about web as overview a little bit before jumping into Flutter and the WebAssembly script directly. So if you are not a web developer at the moment, you have some background information of what is different technology we have for the web. So I'm going to talk about single page web application and PWA and JavaScript and WebAssembly. And then we go into Flutter, how we use WebAssembly in Flutter and how we deploy it. So by the way, right, anytime if you have questions about anything I've been talking, you can just raise your hand. I'm happy to answer your questions and it can be more interactive. Also, we have this little bird in the end. Unfortunately, I just got one, so it will be for one of you here. So what's single page web app, right? So this is probably something we use daily, like the most popular and the most common web application tool, the traditional one, right? So what happens like in the ancient time, very like many years ago, when you have to interact with the web page, one load data, you make a request to the server, and the server sends you back the entire HTML page. And then imagine how you need to refresh the data to load the page, right? It's actually painful. With single page web application, what happens is that instead of load the entire HTML page, you just refresh the data, right? So very similar as what we do now for mobile development. We just ask data in, for example, JSON format, and we parse it, and we display it. So this is probably the most common web technology tool at the moment. It's very fast to load, has very good user experience, and it simplifies the process a lot. You can also cache locally, right? But on the other side, it's actually less secure, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the cross-site scripting. You might have a memory leak with JavaScript, right? It's heavier in terms of the framework, and it might not be so well SEO optimized in a way. Those things you can definitely overcome. So we build a web page, right? You probably, if you're coming from the web background, you probably are familiar with this cross-site scripting. From mobile background, maybe not so much, but what it means, right? That means that attacker can actually inject things that into the script, because what happens is when the browser parsing the HTML page, it literally reads everything, right? Until you see the script ended. It doesn't care if it's actually authenticated or not. So that means the attacker can actually insert some functions in as pretend it's part of the user input into your website, and this might damage your website, right? Your data and how you use your data, and then you just keep parsing it. And so, like, for example, what they can do is they can send like a link to a user and encourage them to click it. And when the user assumes it's actually authenticated, right, or like a real link to click, they click it, but they didn't know actually this is actually not authenticated link. So for this kind of issues, how do you prevent it, right? In this case, when we build a website, right, we should never trust any user input. We should validate all our input data and use a content security policy and implement some output encoding as well. So we make sure that things that we get from the user are validated. So that's very high-level view of what single-page web looks like. On the other side, there's PWA, right? How many of you here used PWA before or developed PWA? Great. So PWA is actually very different from single-page application. It's a progressive web application, and it's built with technology like CSS, HTML, JavaScript. It actually almost makes you feel like it's a native app, but you build with web technology. It's alternative what you can use to build a cross-platform application. If you have a web app already and you want to launch on mobile very quickly, this could be one of the options that you can go for. I'll have the image later, but so as in terms of the benefits, right? It's actually responsible for multiple screens. You can actually install it and distribute it via web. You can access offline, and it's actually quite friendly with indexing for ranking. What is the disadvantage of PWA at the moment? It doesn't support all versions, right? And it probably have less engagement for native users because you don't install them. Depends on how you distribute them, right? You don't have this supportive engagement for App Store for you. And you compare to native mobile application, you have limited hardware access. By the way, am I talking too fast, or is this okay in terms of English? Okay, great. Stop me if you think I'm talking too fast. So this is actually difference from building a mobile application for using HTML, right? As like loading a web page inside your native app, comparing to PWA. With PWA, it does look almost like a native app without having the address bar on the top. So the user does feel like this native app with some limitations. And to build it, right, so or to convert it from your existing web application, it's actually quite straightforward in a way. You just create a manifest file which to configure it and link your HTML to it. And you need to register a service worker that interact the requests and enable lots of app-like features, right? Here's a sample of how the manifest looks like. So PWA is an alternative in terms of single-page web, and it is more friendly for your mobile application, and you can almost convert it from your web application to PWA. Should be quite straightforward, and there's lots of examples of how you can do it from the Google website. A bit of comparison here between these two technologies, and definitely use single-page web app, right? If you want to build your application to support rich user interface, and you have like less server requires to download pages, and you do have like alternative solutions for SEO. And just, like if you want to build a web app, right? It's like probably one of the go-to solution. And you might want to extend it to PWA because PWA is not like a replacement for single page, right? It's probably an extension. If you want to build a cross-platform, go to mobile with limited budget, limited time, and you have like a very tight go-live time, and you have existing web app already. And it's actually very friendly on indexing and ranking and searching. And one of the advantages comparing PWA to native is that you can actually update the content without going through all this App Store approval. So this is actually one of the very nice advantages for PWA. We all know the pain of releasing and updating the application, right? Especially for iOS. I'm sorry for that. So now we know we have single page web application and PWA, right? So where does WebAssembly comes in place, right? Why do we need WebAssembly since we have those two already? And what is WebAssembly? This is before we jump into Flutter, right? We just talked about WebAssembly as a tool, right, on its own for bits. Sorry for this, lots of texting. I'm trying to actually make it shorter already. Feel free to read it or take a photo, or I'm sharing my slides afterwards. So WebAssembly actually it's designed to be a compilation target for multiple language. That means you can actually use language other than JavaScript to build a web application using WebAssembly. And it executes at native speed, and some data suggests it's actually faster to use WebAssembly compared to JavaScript. But when you load it for the first time, it probably takes longer to load for the first time. But once you have it loaded, it should be very quick to view the page. The goal of WebAssembly as well is not to replace JavaScript, right? But to have like other solutions for your product to make your product better. Imagine you have your app already building like a gaming app, right? Building in C or Go, right, or Rust, and you want to load it as a plugin to your web application. You don't want to rewrite everything again, and you probably need the language as in Rust, for example. So here you can use WebAssembly to convert everything and add your WebAssembly module as a service on top of your existing web application. So with WebAssembly, right, it does bring more diversity in language to web, and it compile faster than JavaScript, and that means your existing application, you can port it to web very nicely, and it's secure by default, right? Because we know the issue with JavaScript, right, in terms of the memory leak and other things. But on the other side, with WebAssembly, before now it supports Flutter, the issue that we hear a lot is the garbage collection for language that needs garbage collection, not JavaScript. And the interaction with them natively. And of course, not all language and the browsers are supported with WebAssembly. With this in mind, again, this is not how we use WebAssembly in Flutter, right? But how we use WebAssembly in general. There are 4 options you can do right with WebAssembly. You can write Rust or Flutter application and target WebAssembly as output, right? So some of the steps on the side, right? You write the app with a language, and you create a WebAssembly module, and you distribute it as a service, and then you can just use the module you create as a function, as an instance, right? This is what we can use WebAssembly in Flutter as well before Flutter launched the support for WebAssembly. It's probably one of the quite common solutions. Or you can port the application directly, or you can write your language in assembly level straight away. Feel free to try it. Or you can use this language called assembly script, right, and which compile into Wasm binaries. So there are options that you can choose to use WebAssembly. And there are lots of tutorials and examples on that you can find online using option A for Flutter with a WebAssembly. That was before Google launched the support with Wasm in Flutter. So you can port your module in Flutter project. But we'll talk about like alternatives now with the support with Wasm in Flutter in a different way. So a bit of comparison between Wasm and JavaScript, right? So again, choose JavaScript for a web application. As like this is probably your main the main go-to option. And on top of that, right, if you want to use WebAssembly, that means you probably have your application needs low-level calculations, 3D models, and algorithm. And you want to have all this, but for better performance. And you maybe have a game app that built in different language already, and you want to port it and plug it in your web application. And you have app that built in C, Rust, anything that supports Wasm already. And you like to port them to web. So those are few options, right? Considerations that you might want to use WebAssembly with in your current web application. As I was saying, WebAssembly is not a straightaway replacement for JavaScript, right? It doesn't replace JavaScript for sure, but it's another alternative you can use to make your web app better. Now, with all that in mind, we'll talk about single page web application, PWA, JavaScript, and WebAssembly. So last year we heard the announcement of Flutter and WebAssembly. So the Flutter team spent a lot of time to make WebAssembly possible in Flutter. What it means that you don't actually have to import a module as a WebAssembly module, but you can convert the Dart file into a Wasm file directly now with Flutter. So everything now is possible. So how do we do it? I hear a little bit beep on the computer. Does that mean I have run out of battery or something? Or is that okay? I'm not sure. I'm okay with battery. So I'm sure everyone here knows Flutter. Yeah. So Flutter is a framework that compiles into and support all platforms. I'm going to be quick here. And Wasm actually is the other way around. It compiles different language to support one platform. And the Dart, right, is optimized language for any platform, not just for Flutter, but Flutter is probably the most popular framework that use Dart with. Do you use Dart for anything else other than Flutter? Yeah? I would like to understand a bit more of how you use Dart in your backend.
No, in command line. In command line applications, yes.
Oh, nice. Script language. Right. So Flutter was actually firstly designed as to support multi-platform, but in the beginning we hear a lot of Flutter for mobile application, right, for iOS and Android, and slowly it went to web. And as for today, it does support 6 platforms already. Actually, probably a bit more if you think about embedded devices, but it does support web and desktop. So in the beginning, in Flutter for web, naturally we actually use Flutter for web and use JavaScript, HTML, CSS, right? So that means we use Dart for application framework code and combine with Flutter Web Engine. And then everything gets compiled into this file called the main Dart.js, which is a JavaScript file. And Dart, on its own, naturally has garbage collection function. Dart is not a script language, although it was designed for web originally. At the same time, we use Wasm for Flutter. Sorry, use Wasm for Flutter. It's actually use Dart for app framework and Flutter Web Engine. On top of that, you have the JavaScript in C++. And everything is compiled into this main Dart, the Wasm, right? Not the .js, the Wasm file. And again, the limitation for this is that the browser, right? Not all browsers at the moment support garbage collection. And we will talk a bit more about this in the later slides. So, in case this is a bit confusing, right? I'm going to mention again. With Flutter combined with the language Dart, and it does support different platforms. And you have the choice of using Flutter, the framework, Dart, the language, that you can use this framework for multiple platforms, right? Comparing to Wasm for Flutter, what happens is that you can use multiple language and then get Wasm as output, but this only supports web. So multiple language, one platform with Wasm. So now with Wasm and Flutter, that two options you can, right? Option 1, you can build entire module, your functions, in language that you choose, C, Go, Dart, and compile everything to a module, which is a Wasm module. And you use this module in Flutter as a service, as a library, as a plugin. That means you have this Wasm file into this, you can add this Wasm file into your assets and just starting to use this as a service. That's option 1. Now with the support of Wasm in Flutter, you have option 2. That means you can convert Dart into a Wasm file directly. And with with the tool, and you add Wasm support into the existing Flutter web application, which makes things a lot faster and probably easier as well. Like a bit more dive into the code. How do we add Wasm support into Flutter, right? Assuming you have a Flutter web project already, or you can build something from scratch, right? And instead of run Flutter build web, you add this -- Wasm in the end, and you will see the output as what you see the image on your terminal. And if everything goes well, right? And in terms of the browser, you have two options at the moment. It doesn't support Safari, right? So you can choose Chrome, any Chrome-based browser, not just Chrome, any Chrome-based browser, and Firefox. But there's one additional step. You need to set up the flags, enable the garbage collection flag in those two browsers. Once you've done that, if everything then goes well, open your browser, try localhost, right, and load your web app in Wasm supported way, and then you can see your web page actually running in Wasm. As for users' point of view, they probably don't feel the things that very differently from the user's point of view, but from engineers' point of view, with this support, you have more options to build a very nice Flutter web app now with different solutions, right? Even if you want to use like a Go language or Rust language. There are some limitations, right? And some of the tools at the moment, it's not fully supported yet, like the dev tools and actually some other HTML tools. I will talk a bit more in the later slides. But in terms of to give it a try for now, it should work. On the other hand, as for personal opinion, I don't work for Google. It might not be production ready yet, but the team has actually announced that they're going to add more support and more features towards the Q4 of this year by November-ish. So I'm waiting for the announcement. So behind the scene, right, these slides and the next slides, it will be a bit more of how we convert Dart into Wasm file. Again, I didn't work on this part myself. I get the data from the Flutter Wasm team by Kevin's presentation last year in the WebAssembly conference. So how does Dart convert into Wasm, right? We install the Dart SDK and check out the repository. Again, have this option enabled and have this info Dart, which will give you the file of Wasm. And it's all in one, right? Wasm for Dart. So basically, what happens is that you have this Wasm file as output, which you can just run in your web, and it contains all the assembly code in binary. And a little bit more, if you are curious, again, I got this data from Kevin's presentation. Actually, I talked about this Wasm in Berlin conference in July, and I was saying I actually get the data from Kevin's presentation, and Kevin was just right there in the audience. I feel like I'm honored as well. He is quite supportive. So the file .dart is a common shared front-end between Dart compilers and the static analyzed, right? And the second step, when you compile and transfer your Dart file into Wasm, the second one, it goes into the typeful analysis with the tree optimized with tree shaking, so make it more optimized. Then it goes to the third step to box and unbox the representation of the value type, like the Boolean double int. And then goes into the fourth step, which is the code gen of Wasm. And they use information provided by the previous step to generate the Wasm file. And in the end, the Wasm file is generated. Although there probably there are more smart things that happens behind these steps, but this is like high level view of what happens as the compilation level. How do you convert a dot file into a Wasm file? So, although it sounds like amazing, there's like some limitations, right? And some terms and conditions using Wasm for Flutter. So, first of all, to compile Dart and Flutter to Wasm, you do need support a browser that does garbage collection. And the Wasm garbage collection helps garbage collection language like Dart to execute effectively. And Wasm compilation at the moment for Flutter is only available on the master channel, but which again, I don't think that's a big issue because we can use master channel. Unfortunately, at the moment, development support, like Flutter Run and some dev tools, doesn't support Wasm at the moment. So those might be some of the limitations, like the garbage collection in browser and the dev tools. Those might be one of the blocker for us to not to try Flutter with Wasm, but probably to use Wasm with Flutter for production application. Like imagine that we have this tool, but doesn't support all browsers, right? Like Safari could be one of the main issue. And the problem is actually not with Flutter team, it's with the browser that has to actually have this function to support garbage collection. And I know for a fact that team from Google has worked a lot already to have garbage collection function supported on Chrome and Firefox. So we're waiting again to see the announcement update for other browser support. So in terms of browser, right, you can use anything which is Chrome-based by running the version which is 1.13 or above, and set the enable garbage collection flag. In Firefox, similar process, right? You can run the nightly channel and have these two additional reference set in your browser in Firefox. So you should have your browser ready for language that has garbage collection functions. Right. A bit more limitations other than the browser, right, as I was mentioning before. So to support Wasm, the Dart shifts how it targets browser and the JavaScript API. That means the Dart code that uses the Dart HTML and the package JS from the compilation to Wasm, at the moment, you cannot use them for your web application. So if you have a web application and you want to convert it to Wasm, and you do use those packages, unfortunately, at the moment, you might see errors when you compile it. So, for example, right, you can try if you have a web application and you want to enable Wasm, and you try the command line option, and if you see those errors, like you cannot import Dart HTML, for example, that means you cannot use Wasm for your web application at the moment. Or you might have to find alternative solutions. Like if you work around the web, in terms of browser, you can use two major browsers already, and we just need to wait for more support in terms of browser. There's not much workaround we can do for now. Platform-specific packages, right? If you really want to do a demo of Wasm in Flutter, you have to avoid using the HTML and the package.js library at the moment. And in terms of the dev support, you can use master channel, and yeah, the dev tool at the moment, again, is not available. Again, I didn't build this page myself, but if you like to see how Wasm looks like in this Flutter, the Flutter team built this example website. You can scan the QR code. So actually, everything runs very quickly and nicely, right? You can use it as a full design system tool, change the color, settings, and the configuration of your front-end application with this tool. And just give it a try. I think it looks very nice, and I think the code is also available as well on GitHub. Yeah. So now we know we can use Flutter, right, to build web application in a traditional way using JavaScript or use Wasm, which is actually available as well. As from the mobile engineering side, when we develop and deploy our application, it goes to the App Store, right? So we have like native support for App Store. But like for example, for myself, coming from the mobile background, going to web, one of the things I've been actually thinking and being very curious to find out is how do I deploy my web application? So again, with cloud, with Google, there are more ways you can deploy your web application, right? Here's just like a summary of few very good tools. You can use Compute Engine. This is probably one of the most popular Google GCP tool for your web application. And there's App Engine and Cloud Run. Those two are very similar. They are managed serverless app platform. Although Cloud Run charge you per request, App Engine charge you by the container that you use. And you have Kubernetes, Firebase, and Cloud Functions. So I will talk a bit more about Firebase hosting and a little bit more about Cloud Run. So how do we actually deploy our web app to Firebase? I don't know if you would choose Firebase as a hosting and the deployment tool for your web app, but it's actually something that you can try because Firebase family nowadays has so many different tools to support your application. In terms of build, right, you have Firestore, remote control, and authentication. And in terms of releasing, you have like hosting, app distribution, and more for monitoring and engaging. I'll have to go a bit quicker. So Firebase hosting, it's actually one of the tools that is supported and backed by Google Cloud. So if you want to try Firebase hosting, and you have your contract signed with Google, you should have them naturally. And it's a service that provides you both with static and dynamic content, and it does support you with microservice hosting as well. And one of the most important things here is free. Right? It does actually support like most of the major functions you might need for SL, custom domain, and content delivery. And how do we use Firebase hosting, right? So again, you can either enable it from the command line, from the project root, right? Have, of course, log into Firebase, and init the Firebase hosting. Have your file configured, like the JSON file and everything else. Create it in your project root, and once you have all these configurations, right, running Firebase deploy hosting, that should enable the web app to use Firebase hosting already. And again, one of the quite important thing that you can do tests. You can test your site locally as well in the staging environment. So I don't know if I have enough time, but how do you test? This is steps you can test locally. Because of the time, I probably don't go over things line by line, but feel free to take an image. And you have all this information available on the Firebase website as well. And when do you want to use Firebase hosting, right? It's actually, you can use it on its own, or you can actually combine Firebase hosting with Cloud Functions and Cloud Run to host your microservice on Firebase. And for example, you can write and deploy a function on Cloud Function, and you can deploy a container-based service on Cloud Run, combined with hosting your website on Firebase. A little bit more on Cloud Run, again, because of the timing, I'm not going to go over what is Cloud Run as in very detail. It's basically a fully managed service you can use for your application. And you can use it either from the command line as a tool, from the console, or as in Terraform configuration, or as in console. Yeah, sorry. So I'm actually going to go over this. Thank you. For people who hasn't got a dash, please stand up. People who hasn't got a dash, please stand up. I'm going to through to people who hasn't got it. Okay.